Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our August edition of Conversations About Death. Now, I've been alluding on the page for a few days with who our guest is going to be today. So I'm really excited to interview Janet Miller. Now, Janet is the CEO of Centennial Park, and I know that there are a lot of myths in the industry and in the community about death and dying and burials and cremation. So I thought, we're going to go right to the source, and I'm going to ask Janet a lot of the questions that you've messaged me through. But I thought maybe, Janet, you could introduce yourself and let everyone know a little bit about you and what brought you to this field. So I'll hand over to you.
Well, I've been lucky enough to be the CEO of this beautiful park for 3.5 years now.
Wow, it's that long already.
I haven't been in this line of work for long though, because before that I worked in finance and in legal practice. So I had 20 years in professional services. I was the CEO of a financial services business in Adelaide, and then after that I was the CEO of a commercial legal practice.
I didn't know that about you.
There you go. So, and I got to the point in my life that I think a lot of us do, where I was looking for something a little bit more meaningful.
Yeah.
Obviously the world of commercial law and finance is all very interesting, but it's not very soul satisfying. And so I'd made the decision to leave and go into, I hadn't decided exactly what I wanted to do.
Okay.
And I don't think
this was very left field.
That's right. I don't think working at a cemetery is ever on the top of anyone's career list, to be honest.
It just happens, doesn't it?
It
just happens.
And so I'd set some criteria for myself that it needed to be in an organisation that was giving back to the community in some way, and that was really all. And of course I opened the paper and there it is, the CEO at Centennial Park, and I thought, well, I hadn't really thought about that, but it sort of meets that criteria, so I'm going to investigate. And the more I looked into it, the more I just knew this was the one for me.
And how lucky are we that she did? Look, Janet, I'm very honoured. Centennial Park hold a very special place in my heart, as you all know, and you've been following along. Centennial Park have been extremely supportive of my book that I wrote with Ellie, The Present Box, and they've been a part of it since day one. There wasn't anything that you weren't willing to do to help us get this out to the public, and I think it's wonderful that, you know, we're on the same page with, you know, the mission and ethos of Centennial Park about education and support. You want to tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, and about demystifying, as you said in your opening, about demystifying cemeteries. Cemeteries are such important places. You know, they contain history for one thing, but I think more than that, for society, I think they're really important emotional anchor points for people. So when people have lost somebody, to be able to have somewhere to come to anchor you emotionally is really important.
Absolutely.
And we also know from research that's been done internationally that a memorial, as well as the funeral service, are really important parts, I guess, of the whole process of helping people deal with the loss of someone that they've loved. So they're really important rituals.
You're absolutely
and they really
right.
help people.
And one of the things that I've learnt with people that I've studied with is it's all about holding space, and Centennial Park holds space to allow people to grieve and say goodbye. I hold space with my clients when we do funeral services, and that's a really big part of the grieving process, and you can't rush it.
No,
so I think the fact that time, you know, sort of stands still when someone dies, and I think what Centennial Park offers is just a beautiful thing. And I had a few private conversations with a few of my Facebook followers, and there are so many myths about cemeteries and cremations. So I'm absolutely going to put you on the spot with this and throw some questions at you, if that's all right.
We welcome it. So as I said, we are completely transparent. So we do tours, we welcome people at any time to really come and see what it is that we do.
We'll talk further about that, because many years ago, when I was studying my Diploma of Grief and Loss, I did a behind-the-scenes tour of Centennial Park. Little did I know that 18 years later I would be doing work with you, but it was really very eye-opening. So I wanted to raise a couple of the topics that I know that people, as a celebrant, people ask me all the time. Clearly you can dispel the myth with cremations that, you know, cremations are done en masse. That's not true.
Absolutely not. So one person at a time in a cremator. a cremator, practically speaking anyway, a cremator fits one coffin at a time. They don't fit more than one. But out of respect for the person that has been lost, we would never cremate more than one person. We have excellent quality control processes in place so that ashes are never mixed together. We always are dealing with one person at a time.
And you're very good with identification, and
Absolutely.
there's an absolute line of accountability.
There sure is. Yeah, we track that from receiving that person into our care. So whenever anyone comes into our care, whether it's somebody that someone has lost or whether it's somebody that's grieving, they are treated with the utmost care and respect as if they were a member of our own family.
Beautiful. And I know, look, it takes a special type of person to work in a crematorium, and I know that I do services every day of babies and children and adolescents. That's not to say that they're any harder than older people, but in our perception, it doesn't seem, the right way of life that any parent should have to say goodbye to their child. So, working in the crematorium, that must be really challenging for the staff in there.
It is.
And how do they process that? How do they get their head around all of that?
I think a couple of things. You're right that I think working in a cemetery or in the funeral industry or as a celebrant, I think it takes a certain kind of individual, and people are drawn to work here, and they are people that are very compassionate by and large. So I have a team of very compassionate people.
They're pretty wonderful people in the crematorium.
They are wonderful people, but you're right that it takes a personal toll because we take on board other people's grief. And so we make sure that we provide there's counselling services,
sort of
so as part of our
and
employee assistance program.
Beautiful.
We also provide, grief training, and one of the things that we're looking at for this year is to roll out a mental health first aid program as well. So
excellent.
We're very mindful of the health and well-being, the mental health and well-being of our team.
You really value your staff.
Absolutely. Yeah,
and it is, the one thing I wanted to say is that I've been working with Centennial Park and at Centennial Park for many, many, many years. And the one thing that stands out to me is that everybody really loves working here, whether it be the chapel staff, the assistants that are in the lounge, the gardening team, the crematorium staff. Everybody's happy. They all wave to me as we go through, and it's a bit of a tight-knit family. You don't see that very often, so you've obviously cultivated that culture very well.
We have a team of around 55, and we are, of course, Centennial Park, for those that don't know, is set on 40 hectares, so it's quite a large site. And
we've got, just behind us here, we've actually got the backdrop of the map of Centennial Park, and it's huge. It's enormous. So how many gardeners would you have tending to the park?
We have, in our operations area, we have a team of around about 25 who not only look after the gardens, but then they will work on the burials team, and then they will work in the crematorium. So they work across all of the areas. And we are spread geographically across the park, but I have to say that in all of the organisations that I've worked in, some a lot larger, some smaller, but this is the most united team that I've ever worked with.
And it's noticeably so.
Because we're all here for the same. We all want to do the very best we can for the families that come into our care. And it's very much a shared goal that we have to do the very best that we can.
So when did Centennial Park start? What year did it sort of cultivate, and how has it sort of grown from that?
So it started in 1936.
Wow.
And it is owned, this is something else actually that many people don't know, it's owned by two councils jointly. So the cities...
Was it a cemetery first and then a crematorium came later?
Yes, so
because I think cremations came in the 50s and 60s.
So that came much later. So it was a cemetery first, but of course now, we see that, it's around about 75 to 80% of people choose cremation. And
I was going to ask you the ratio, has that changed? Because obviously before cremation came in, it really was a case of, they were normally officiated by a leader of a church, a minister. It was a graveside burial. Beryl, who was on the choir, there's always a Beryl on the choir, would sing graveside, and that we've evolved so much now that we have chapel services, we have celebrants, we have DVD compilations of photos. We have performances and singers and speakers, and it's really changed, hasn't it?
It has changed, and from that one burial in that first year, we now have 170,000 people that are memorialised at Centennial Park. So whether that be through a burial or through an Ashes memorial.
You are very good. When I was driving up here this morning, I thought, I should really ask her, and then I thought, I don't really want to put her on the spot, but how well do you know your things? Wow, that's well. And look, a couple of people privately messaged me. They didn't want me to mention them by name, but they have heard, myths and stories in the community about burials and internment rites when somebody's buried. Can you give us a bit of an idea? Because obviously an internment rite is for a specific period of time. What happens when that internment rite comes up to date or is up for expiration? Can you give us an idea of what happens?
And I think the first thing to explain is that South Australian legislation until recently only allowed for what we call limited tenure. So we have only ever been able to offer memorial positions or burial positions for set periods of time. So it's very different to what the situation in the eastern states. So that's the first thing. In 2013, there was a change to the legislation, and we can now offer perpetuity as well as...
So forever and ever ongoing.
Yes.
How does that work?
So that literally does mean forever. So it doesn't mean 200 years or 100 years. It literally means forever. So and we're the only major metropolitan cemetery in South Australia that is actually offering perpetuity. So for us, it's all about choice.
Yes, absolutely.
But going back to limited tenure, so when people purchase an interment right, which then gives them the right to bury somebody or to have ashes memorialised for a set period of time, of course we encourage people to keep their details with us up to date, but that doesn't always happen. But there's quite a lengthy process. So if we're getting to, it's year 49 and it's a 50-year interment right, we start a year out and we write to the family, and that's when our process starts. So making sure that we've got the right details on file, just reminding them that the interment right is going to expire at the end of the following year, and giving them their options. Now, if we get a response that says, well, this person isn't at this address anymore.
Right, which would happen quite frequently, I guess.
Particularly when we're dealing with now interment rights that were taken out 50 years ago. And of course, people have moved around, and now we have email addresses. It's a lot easier to keep in contact. But
we didn't have that technology then, did we?
So we undertake a search with any publicly available information to see if we can locate the person. We also place adverts. We place 4 adverts in the advertiser.
I have seen those over the years.
So we try to find people that way. And if we still can't find them, there is a sticker that we're required to place. So if we're going to be taking a memorial away, there's a sticker that we will place.
Little blue stickers that I've seen on sites.
So that if they do happen to visit the park, they also know that we need them to contact us. But I think the main thing I'd like to say is that once somebody is buried at Centennial Park, they stay buried. We would never.
This was one of the other questions that happened with it, and I'm sure you can appreciate there are lots of myths and stories about horror stories of things that happen, and I'm the first to say, look, that actually isn't true, but you can now hear it straight from the
We would never
experience.
ever exhume somebody from an expired site. The only time that an exhumation ever takes place is when a family has applied to the Attorney General and the Attorney General has granted permission. But so what we will do is, if we've exhausted, and this is normally then say a 3-year process of trying to locate the family. So there's actually
quite a period of time. It's not something that happens within 7 days or 3 months. You've given ample time.
We've thrown everything we can at it.
Sure.
And if we still can't locate the family, or if the family indeed decide that they don't want to continue with that position,
it is their choice.
And then somebody else wants that position, and we're very transparent about that. So if someone's looking for a position, they will always know if that is a site that has been used before. It's completely transparent. But what we will do then is that our team will, if there is a person that had been buried 50 years ago, they will move those remains down to a lower level in the grave.
In the same spot.
Same spot. They are not removed.
Okay.
They are simply moved to a lower level.
And is that placed in something, or is that just moved
No,
to...
they're normally placed in what we call an ossuary and moved to a lower level.
Wow.
But
So it's very respectful.
it's extremely respectful, and I've witnessed this myself. And we have a chart that shows every bone in the body, and I can tell you that by hand our team members will be in that grave position,
Searching
very carefully by hand, making sure that they have done a thorough and respectful job.
That's amazing.
And then that person, so really what the difference is that the monument no longer exists. So that person is still buried.
Correct.
We haven't moved
So if
them.
family had come and visited before and they knew where they were interred,
Yes.
they can still technically come. And maybe somebody else interred in a newer part of that grave,
That's
but
right.
deep down at a deeper rate,
Yes.
their loved one still remains.
Absolutely
I think that's
right.
wonderful.
Absolutely.
Wow. And obviously the industry that we work in, there are stonemasons that, you know, come along, and you can walk through the cemetery. And I wanted, before I forget, to say that Centennial Park are doing some amazing things in the community. So I know that you do yoga in the park.
We do.
You do walking meditations in the park, and they're actually part of the Sala Festival at the moment. So you've got sculptures and things scattered around the park. What was the thought process of being involved in that, do you think?
We've been part of Sala for a number of years now, but I think there's a very strong connection between art and between grief and death. I think in a number of ways. I think art is very healing for a start.
Absolutely.
And I also think, you know, art, which is about life, and we're about life.
Correct.
So we're here for the living, and certainly we provide beautiful memorial spaces so that you can honour the person that you've loved and lost, but we're actually here to provide support and that emotional anchor point for the living. So with that connection between art and the work that we do, we saw that a partnership with Sala was a very natural partnership.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, and obviously you would have seen the sculpture at the main entrance.
It's, for those of you that haven't seen it, look, it's just worth a drive up Goodwood Road to have a look. So it's basically the shaped hands, which are, it is just beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that and the artist and how that came about? And
Yes, so we've been planning for many years to create an entrance to the park, a beautiful entrance, and there is it's a semicircular entrance into the park, so it was really crying out for something to be placed in the middle there. And we thought, given our connection with art and how important we think art is, we went out to a public tender and invited artists to respond with their proposed artwork that they would place in that position. We had about 35 responses to that, and all bar one
I'm learning
were
about this.
South
I didn't
Australian.
even know this about the sculpture, so
All bar one of the responses were South Australian, and there was
we're very big on South Australia. So
we are, and the person that we chose, Carl Meyer, who many people would know, he's won awards through the Brighton Jetty Sculptures.
okay, right, yes.
He's a local artist, so he's actually works in Edwardstown, and he put forward this proposal, and
you loved
we
it.
just
How long did it take
Loved
for
it.
it to come to life, so to speak?
I think it was around about, I'm trying to think back, it would have been about a 7 or 8 month process.
Wow,
So
it's absolutely beautiful.
but the engineering alone, when you think about it, it's two hands, and that they just, it's the lightest of touch, and how he has managed from an engineering point of view to have that sculpture just to stand like that with just the lightest of touches. It's so beautiful and so emotive. And whenever we partner with Sala as well, we will often take afterwards, there'll be specific pieces that just really resonate and really speak to us, and we will often purchase pieces as well. And we've now created our own sculpture walk. So we love having Sala and we love that walk, but we actually have our own sculpture walk.
And you can
now as
come
well.
up to the offices here just off of Goodwood Road and actually get a map,
Yes.
and that will take you around and give you sort of a semi-guided tour
Yes.
about all of the
Yes.
Sala pieces. And there are other things that I wanted all of our followers to know, is that Centennial Park really prides itself on supporting the community. So, you know, you do a special thing for Mother's Day and Father's Day where you have musicians in the park, and it's a very gentle, supported, subtle way of people coming back to remember. There are other events during the year that I've been very privileged to officiate and work with you all on, and I really respect the ethos that you have of, you know, knowledge and education and support and encouraging people to talk about it. You know, I think gone are the times where death is taboo, and you know, just because you talk about death, it's not going to bring it on.
No, that's right.
There's a lot of the older community, I think, you know, were brought up in very different ways, and it wasn't socially acceptable to talk about death and forward planning and that sort of thing. But I think particularly maybe in the last 10 years, that's
Yes.
become a little bit more relaxed. What do you think?
We did. We undertook a significant market research project a few years ago. It's really important for us to understand what is it that the community wants from us as a memorial park,
Right.
rather than us thinking that we know. So we went out to our community and asked a whole range of questions, and a lot of really interesting things came back. One of the really important things that came back was that a really high percentage, it was somewhere around 90% of people, think that the most important thing in planning a funeral is knowing the wishes of the person that has passed away. And yet, so few of those same
Have that
people had actually had the conversation and
Correct. I was
communicated
reading
those
something
wishes.
about that last night.
And so it's clearly, it's not only we think it's important, but clearly the whole community thinks it's important.
Correct.
To understand the wishes of their loved ones. And so for us, having the conversation is really important. Demystifying cemeteries, it's all part of that process. It's really important. The book launch that we had when we launched,
it was such an exciting night.
It was a wonderful night. But again, you know, that was such an obvious partnership. We didn't have to hesitate for a second, because that is, again, it's about education. It's about demystifying.
And I remember having a conversation with Janet saying, "Oh, Janet, I'm actually writing a children's picture book." And she looked at me and said, "I need to hear more about this, and please keep us abreast of what was happening." And it really was. They were able to see all of the pictures before they went to the print house, and they were supportive from day one. And, you know, we had 150 odd people come on a Tuesday night to see the launch of the book, and we were really lucky to have the Children's Commissioner that came along and launched that for us. But I think it is just forging forward, and I'm doing a community forum. So I'm doing an event on Saturday the 21st of September called Community Conversations About Death. So it's 16 people, keeping it intimate. There's no technology, there's no computers, there's no screens. We're just going to have conversation. We're going to sort out a death plan. We're going to talk about things that nobody's talking about. So
no, that's fantastic. It is so important. So important.
So if somebody wants to, you mentioned before, and I know that you do these, the behind the scenes tours. Do you have some coming up? What does someone do if they want to come along to a tour? And what do they get to see?
They get to see everything. We will take them through the gardens and through the chapels, and we will also take them through the crematorium.
Wow.
We will obviously, if people don't want to go through the crematorium, we will
optional.
respect that. But we believe in being completely open and transparent, as I mentioned. So I think people don't know what goes on in a crematorium, what happens in a cremation, and I think when they don't know, they just fill in the blanks for themselves. And so we're very proud of our crematorium. We've got beautiful facilities, and I think people don't realise that they have a choice when it comes to cremation, and most people know where they're going to be buried, but people don't think to ask about where their loved one is going to be cremated. And we're not the only crematorium in South Australia. There are a number of crematoria. We're very, very proud of ours and the care that we take, and so we have that open, and any day of the week anyone could come down and I would be able to walk into our crematorium without any forward phoning to say someone's on the way.
So Contemplation Court, if someone were Sometimes funerals and cremations are really traumatic for families. Sometimes people die very unexpectedly and suddenly, and they're just not in the headspace to know what they want to do with their loved one's ashes. So can you give us an idea of Contemplation Court and what the purpose of that is?
Yes.
With how you support people?
For that very reason, we established an area in Centennial Park called Contemplation Court, and it's a beautiful temporary memorial area. So if someone is cremated at Centennial Park, the family is able to have their ashes kept at Contemplation Court. Beautiful. And there will be a marker, and it's a beautiful area, and it means the family can come and visit until they make up their mind.
And how long can a client stay in Contemplation Court?
They can stay in there for 6 months.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yes, so, and it's a beautiful space. There's running water, there's a lovely place to sit. So it's not tucked away and hidden in the corner of the park. It's right there in the middle of the park in a beautiful area. So.
And I love the fact that Centennial Park has different areas. So you have Springbank Island, you have Contemplation Court. You actually also support a lot of different cultures. You're very multicultural here at Centennial Park.
Yes.
And I know that with some cultures, witnessing the charge, for example, now I'm going to get Janet to explain that. I know that sounds like a very direct corporate way of saying that, but can you explain what witnessing the charge is?
Yes, witnessing the charge is when a family wishes to be present for the time when the coffin is actually inserted into the cremator. And in some cultures, it's particularly important. We worked very closely with the Sikh community and the Hindu community, and it's very important to them that the eldest male relative is responsible for that person. Well, it would have been placed on the funeral pyre, of course, but here it's being into the cremator. And so what we have now is also it's a remote, if you like, so that for those communities where that is really important, they can, from a room, look into the crematorium, and they can actually control the insertion process themselves.
And the witnessing of the charge, the room that they're in, that is seen as part of the tour. You can actually show people what that looks like. So I think the one thing I wanted to communicate today, that there are no secrets. A lot of the myths that you hear in the industry and in the community are just that. They're just myths. And if you have a question, go straight to the source. Absolutely. If you want to know something about what goes on here at Centennial Park, give them a ring, drop them an email, ask to speak to someone, because they're all really, really happy to have the conversation, which brings me to the point to say thank you so much for being so open and willing for me to throw all these questions at you. You've been very gracious, and the whole purpose of doing these monthly videos is to ask you all to put the kettle on, grab a friend, and have the conversation. So Janet, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you,
Wonderful.
Michelle.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.